Hello, it's Monday the 5th of September and welcome to your 5-minute briefs from Seoul. I'm your host, Hee-Jin Koo. In our first episode of the month, we take a look at South Korea's continued economic woes, including the ever-weakening won and its biggest ever monthly trade deficit. We also explore how the nation is bracing for super typhoon Hinam-no, which is already starting to cause havoc on the Korean peninsula. We also examine the surge in the cost of overseas education amid soaring inflation and a feeble won, the growing jitters over the impact of a US law on subsidies for South Korean electric automobiles, as well as South Korea's further easing of COVID-19 testing mandates for arrivals from overseas. Let's begin our 5-minute roundup. South Korea posted a record monthly deficit amid skyrocketing fuel costs as its local currency tumbled against the dollar to its weakest in more than 13 years. According to the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy on Thursday, Asia's fourth largest economy saw its August exports hit $56.67 billion, a 6.6% increase on year, while imports jumped 28.2% to $66.15 billion in the cited period. This resulted in a deficit of $9.47 billion in August, the nation's highest ever monthly figure in the red since it began compiling relevant data 66 years ago. Analysts attributed the shortfall to what they call the perfect storm. In other words, tighter monetary policy, the local currency's weakness against the greenback, surging consumer prices, as well as global factors such as disruptions in the global supply chains and concerns about slowing economic growth in China, the biggest market for South Korea. The local currency on Friday ended at 1,362 won 60 against the US dollar, down 7.7 won from the previous day, the weakest since the 1st of April 2009 when it closed at 1,379 won 50. Statistics Korea said on Friday, South Korea's inflation lightly tapped the brakes, expanding by 5.7% in August compared to a year earlier, after surging at its fastest pace in 24 years a month earlier. Still, the rate will likely remain at the current level, if not higher, as the nation will see a series of hikes in utilities costs, and as makers of food and other necessities warned they will soon raise their prices to reflect a surge in ingredients and operating costs. Another factor that may add to inflationary woes is the approach of the strongest typhoon this season. South Korea issued a slew of advisories as it braced for Typhoon Hinam-no, the 11th tropical cyclone this year, which will likely close in on the mainland early tomorrow. The Korea Meteorological Administration said the Category 5 typhoon may likely be as devastating as Memi and Nari of nearly 2 decades ago. This comes on the heels of the record downpours that ravaged the Greater Seoul area and the central region just last month. As of 9 a.m. Sunday, Hinam-no, with a diameter of 180 kilometers, was traversing north from waters east of Taipei at a speed of 18 kilometers per hour, with top speeds of 47 meters per second, which is strong enough to derail trains. The Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasures Headquarters issued advance warnings in most major cities in the southwestern region and in the surrounding provinces of North and South Jeolla and South Gyeongsang at dawn on Sunday, a day after similar alerts were issued in the southernmost island of Jeju. The country will likely see between 100 and 300 millimeters of rain between the 4th and the 6th of September, with more than 600 millimeters pelting down on Jeju. Its current speed and strength is similar to those of Typhoon Memi in 2003, which killed 117 people, left 13 others missing, and caused more than 4.3 trillion won or $3.6 billion in damages. And amid such economic concerns, South Korean parents with children studying overseas are seeing a surge in household spending on the back of the won's weakness as well as soaring inflation both at home and abroad. The won has depreciated by 14.7% this year alone, which means it costs about 15% more plus exchange commission to wire money overseas for their children's tuition as well as living expenses. And rubbing salt on the wound are colleges who are upping tuition fees after a 2-year freeze during the pandemic. Colleges and universities across the US have signaled they will raise fees by an average of 3 to 4%. Now, while the hike is nowhere near the overall annual US inflation rate that stood at 8.5% in July, it is a considerable drain on family spending. This has prompted households to cut corners by packing lunches or eating menus at convenience stores rather than at restaurants, foregoing luxury and entertainment costs, cancelling Netflix and other OTT streaming services, and putting off holiday travel plans and orders on new cars. And with some analysts predicting that the won may weaken further to the 1400 range, a report by Joseonilbo and TV Joseon cited a survey by brokers that arrange higher education overseas, which found that about 18% of people who were studying overseas or had plans to do so have put their dreams on the back burner. The number of South Koreans studying overseas stood at some 195,000 as of 2020, according to the latest tally from the Ministry of Education. More than 1 in 4, or 52,000 of the total, were studying in the US. Meanwhile, consternation is brewing among South Korean automakers over the Joe Biden administration's Inflation Reduction Act, as it appears auto giants such as Hyundai Motor and subsidiary Kia will lose their edge in the US electric vehicle market. The Hyundai Motor Group became the second best seller of electric vehicles in the US, largely on the back of the popularity of the Hyundai Ioniq 5 and Kia EV6. The automaker sold more than 17,000 units of Ioniq 5 and nearly 14,000 units of EV6 models so far this year, compared with 0 sales of EVs last year. The auto giant had hoped to make a natural EV transition in the US market. As such, Hyundai Motor announced in May it will pour a record $5.5 billion in investments to build a massive plant in Bryan County, Georgia, dedicated to EVs and EV batteries, slated to roll out cars in the first half of 2025. However, the landmark act that passed both houses and was signed into law by Biden last month specifies that EVs and its components, including batteries, need to be built and assembled in North America in order to qualify for subsidies of about $7,500 per unit. This means that other car makers that can take advantage of the benefits will be able to edge out Hyundai Motor and other South Korean firms who assemble their products outside North America. South Korea's Trade and Foreign Affairs ministries have lodged queries and requests with their counterparts in Washington. They are also mulling the possibility of joining forces with the UK and other European nations to address their concerns. Hyundai Motor Group Chief Lee Sun-jung immediately flew to Washington for discussions. The group is also speeding up the timetable for its Georgia plant to try and maintain its US market share. On a brighter note, international travelers no longer need to submit COVID-19 test results prior to their arrival, as Seoul further eased procedures to allow easier access to visitors from overseas. South Korea began applying newly eased procedures for Korean nationals and foreigners on Saturday, regardless of vaccination status and country of departure. Still, health authorities will keep in place a mandate for everyone to submit the result of a PCR test taken within 24 hours of arriving in the country. The government explained that the change reflects the global trend of scrapping pre-departure testing rules amid a decline in infections. Nevertheless, health officials plan to adopt a stricter monitoring system during the upcoming Chuseok Thanksgiving holiday to mitigate another surge of infections. That wraps it up for this episode of 5-Minute Briefs from Seoul. This has been Heejun Koo for KBSI, wishing you all a happy Chuseok.